Mount Vernon is an American landmark and former plantation of George Washington, the first president of the United States. It's one of the most famous gardens and farms in American history. It was a self-sufficient plantation. The estate contained 4 gardens, 5 farms, a paddock for deer, and included a kitchen garden for growing fruits and vegetables all year round. But sadly, it also had a large number of resident slave workers, and by the time of Washington's death, more than 300 slaves resided on the plantation. Noted for adopting the less formal, more naturalistic style of 18th century English gardens, George Washington oversaw all aspects of the landscape at Mount Vernon, and he was deeply involved with the design and work on the estate, and there are many diary entries describing the work he did on the land. Washington instructed his enslaved workers to reshape walks, roads and lawns, cut vistas through the forest and plant hundreds of native trees and shrubs. 18th century visitors were delighted by bountiful offerings of fresh vegetables and fruits, and revelled in after-dinner walks amongst all manner of opulent flowering plants. Washington also conducted experiments on his farm to improve his production. He experimented with animal manure, lime, gypsum, marl, a mixture of clay, calcium, magnesium carbonates and remnants of shells, green manures, and salt to improve yields. Over 300 slaves laboured at Mount Vernon plantation. Fewer than half were owned by George Washington. 153 were part of the bridal dowry of Martha Washington, and the rest were rented out by other plantation owners. Most of the slaves worked and lived on the estate's farms. Many who worked at the Mansion House farm were craftsmen such as blacksmiths and carpenters. Others were weavers and cooks. Almost half of Mount Vernon's slaves were too young, too old, or too weak to work daily. Mount Vernon's slaves led a dismal life. They toured from sunup to sundown every day but Sunday. In addition to taking care of Mount Vernon, they also handled their own daily chores such as caring for livestock, planting and harvesting gardens, and cooking and preserving food. Their quarters were once described as wretched. Days off for the Washington slaves were rare, although they were usually given time off for Christmas, Easter and other religious holidays. Most of Mount Vernon's slaves were Christian, but some practiced African voodoo or Islam. Washington was, at times, a brutal slave master. Although some reports state he treated his slaves well, documentation showed he worked them relentlessly, employed harsh punishment and sold them on at will, often separating families. Some of Mount Vernon's slaves fought back against their unfair fate by attempting to escape. At least 2 were successful: George Washington's personal cook, Hercules, and Martha Washington's personal maid, Oney Judge. Other slaves chose more passive ways of protest, such as underperformance, theft and sabotage. Martha Washington went to great lengths to capture Oney Judge, but she eluded her grasp. Washington's will stipulated his slaves be emancipated upon Martha's death, but she freed them in 1801, the year before she died. She could not legally free her dower slaves, however, and they were returned to the Custis estate, and ownership passed to her grandchildren. Martha may not have freed Mount Vernon slaves early out of the goodness of her heart, since according to Abigail Adams in a letter to her sister, the slaves knew they were to be freed upon her death, and Martha feared they might kill her to hasten their freedom. Abigail wrote, "Martha did not feel as though her life was safe in their hands, many of whom would be told that it was in their interest to get rid of her. She therefore was advised to set them all free at the end of the year,